Hey everybody, around the nation right here, Kiwiki Nation. I'm your host, Jeff Waldorf. Welcome to another show. Normally on Tuesdays we have Rob the Cone, but couldn't make it here today, so you've just got me today. Round is actually out all week, so not sure when we're going to see him next, but hopefully next week. And on a different day. So, with that, I know a lot of you are looking forward to Ron. I was looking forward to Ron. But again, if you can't be here, you can't be here. But don't worry, we'll go on with the show, and it'll be a good one. I've got a lot of interesting stuff that I want to talk about, including Bernie Sanders' plan to save money on prescription drugs. New study out shows how much we'll actually save, not just, of course, people who are buying the drugs, but the taxpayer overall. So that's pretty awesome. Then some disastrous news on the opioid addiction crisis. We've got Republicans on killing the First Amendment. We've got Foxconn coming. And you should see the sweetheart deal that they're going to be getting from Wisconsin. And then I'm going to talk about media consolidation and specifically Sinclair Broadcasting. So very interesting. A lot of stuff that I want to talk about today. A lot of interesting topics. And then, of course, there's stuff that I didn't get to. Of course, Reince Priebus is out. I found that quite hilarious because right after I did a segment that was like, Priebus, his days are numbered. He's gone. They've railroaded him out. Like 2 hours after I posted that segment, he's out. Trump pushes him out. And then Scaramucci, also gone from the new, because of the new White House Chief of Staff. I believe that's General John Kelly, who was not a fan of Scaramucci. Now, this is interesting because, like, a lot of people are completely recoil at anybody Donald Trump picks for anything. But as far as I know from John Kelly, former general, wasn't too impressed at, Trump's firing of Comey, him saying, hey, Mooch, get the fuck out of here. It's kind of an interesting pick. And it makes sense. Like, if you're somebody who wants to order the White House, bring a little order, stop the leaks especially, you're going to bring in somebody like John Kelly, who's a military guy, who's going to try to restore order to your administration. Which is kind of sad because I do like talking about the train wreck that is the Trump administration. But at the same time, I also don't want, maybe I do want the administration to be a train wreck so they don't get any of their disastrous policies passed. But at the same time, that's not the way the administration is actually supposed to work. And look, John Kelly's got a very hard job. He's got to bring order to the childish White House, the child in the White House. So now he's got to be the babysitter. So we'll see how long he lasts as chief of staff before he actually gets on Donald Trump's bad side and ends up leaving under a bus. We'll see. But for right now, that's why the mooch is gone. I didn't get to talk about that yesterday when he got fired after 2 weeks. Gone. He's out of there, man. Out of there. As far as John Kelly is concerned, though, the reason that I think that he's going to try to restore order, again, because the military thrives on order. He's going to try to institute more rigorous checks of people who are working in the White House, try to restore a little bit of normalcy with more structure. We'll see if he can do it or not. We'll see. It should be very interesting to figure out what's going to happen. So, again, this White House, oh boy. So, anyway, with Scaramucci and Priebus all taken care of, that's the stuff that I wanted to catch up on, like the big news stories today. Oh, also, we might be leaving Afghanistan. Oops. I don't know. Like, Donald Trump says, I want to leave Afghanistan. We want to start pulling out the troops. I'm actually, if that's true, I'm going to give them a lot of credit because there's no reason we should continue to be in Afghanistan. The Pentagon's like, oh, terrible. Mainstream corporate media, like New York Times, Washington Post, is like, oh my God, how could you just leave the job undone? We couldn't possibly do that. We've got to, we got to stay in there for the long haul or just not be in there at all. Okay, well, let's just not be there in there at all. We shouldn't have been there at all. So, yeah, great. If that's true, then I'm going to give a lot of credit to President Trump for not continuing our presence in this disastrous war, because all we're doing in Afghanistan anyway is protecting the poppy fields. Not something that I want to be spending our taxpayer money on. You want to bitch about transgender surgeries? Our military is protecting poppy fields in Afghanistan. Just saying. But anyway, there's that. Once I get more news on that, I'll actually do a proper segment on it and break it down, the reasons why, what people are saying about it, and then, of course, offer my own commentary. But anyway, let's start out, again, with some good news here. Before I get into that, of course, I want to thank the patrons, patreon.com/TYTNation. I want to give some shout-outs here. We'll start over. Camille Rin, Orleni Silverio, X, Mark Bass, Philip Morrison, Pam, Scott Nimitz, Dan Peachy, Nancy Getz, Stephen Nordsby, Karen Fogelsong, Benjamin Squires, Jacob Torrey, Rogue X. Is that related to X? Or I'm just curious. Just kidding. Chris Heimbuck, Enrique Portela, J.A. Douglas, and Linda Gerds, as well as Elizabeth Uval. So thank you, all of you, for supporting independent progressive media. Patreon.com/TYTNation. Thank you for all of your help in keeping independent progressive media going and growing. So I appreciate it. All right. Anyway, so let's get into the stories here. Oh, that's a weird water bottle. Anyway, let's begin. Several months ago, Bernie Sanders released a plan to make drug prices cheaper. Well, how? Well, by opening up the importation of cheaper drugs from other countries. Well, that makes sense. And look, it wasn't just one bill. It was a bill, and it was an amendment. So he's been trying to put forward different pieces of legislation to essentially do the same thing. To make drugs cheaper by saying, hey, let's buy it from Canada, or let's buy it from Europe, let's buy it from other countries that, actually sell it for much, much cheaper. That'll save Americans money. That actually save the government money. Now, right now, according to the International Business Times, and David Sirota wrote a great piece on this, and I'm going to quote him here. He said, under existing law, drug makers are permitted to produce pharmaceuticals in other countries, abroad, and then import them into the United States. So that's a scam, right? So they go, and these pharmaceutical companies, Merck and whatever, I can't think of a lot of examples of them right off the top of my head. But they will go and they will make these drugs in Canada. For example, let's use Canada as an example, right? They'll manufacture them there. So that means Canadian jobs, right? And then they'll import the drugs back into the United States, where they will sell them at a higher cost to where they sell them to people in Canada. So people in Canada pay less for the same drug that people in America pay much, much more for here in America. Because we don't allow the companies to import those drugs back. Or we do allow the companies, actually, but we don't allow the consumer. So I misspoke there. Now, like I said, the problem here is that the companies can re-import those drugs because it's their drugs, right? But consumers and people who distribute those drugs are not able to. Now, the current law prohibits consumers and pharmaceutical wholesalers from doing the same. Because of that, these companies obviously can sell drugs at a more expensive rate, driving up the cost for both us and the government, consumers. Now, conservatives, funny enough, they like to complain about the cost of socialized medicine. Well, this is one of the reasons that socialized medicine is actually expensive. Right now, we can't import these drugs from other countries. And we also can't negotiate, Medicare can't negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies using the leverage of the government. So they have been banned from being able to do that to save money. That's interesting. So, and again, back to how they like to complain about the cost. They don't actually want to do anything to bring down the cost, because when they do, they lose their biggest talking point. Oh, it costs too much. It costs, you can't do it, can't do it. Well, okay, well, let's bring down the cost, and then we can do it. And actually, we can do it right now. And it's actually, it would be cheaper under a Medicare for All system, not only for the government, of course, but for the consumer as well, who would just end up paying money out of their taxes. Their money doesn't have to go to advertising fees or executive bonuses or any of the other waste that's inherent in a for-profit system, administrative wastes. So, but anyway, so without established, right, here comes Bernie Sanders, along with 21 other Democratic lawmakers. So, they came in and they introduced a plan to simply let Americans import drugs from other countries. Now, how much cheaper would it be? No, I keep talking about, it's going to be cheaper. It's going to be, okay, Jeff, here's some numbers, right? Oh, okay. The CBO estimates that the change would, in total, reduce federal government drug spending by more than $6.8 billion over the next 10 years, including a reduction of $5.1 billion in direct spending and roughly $1.7 billion in increased revenue. Now, this is a change that even Republicans can get in favor of. Now, remember, one of the people who voted for the Sanders amendment and the Sanders bills was Republican Ted Cruz. Now, he's a Canadian. And maybe it's like, well, he was a Canadian. Formerly a Canadian dual citizen, no longer, of course. Even he's like, dude, that doesn't make any sense. Just allow them to import drugs. Freedom. Whatever argument you want to use as a conservative to justify this, I don't really care, because it's good policy, whether you look at it from the framing of a right winger or a left winger. It's just good policy. It's going to save a lot of money. Wonderful. Now, of course, as I've reported before, corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans, well, they killed it. They got together. They didn't like this change. They get funded by the pharmaceutical companies, as I'm going to show you. And they got together and they killed this. Now, among the Democrats who voted against this was potential 2020 contender, maybe not potential anymore, Senator Cory Booker. Now, Booker, of course, he's from senator from New Jersey. That is a state that is home to several major pharmaceutical companies, including Bayer, Johnson & Johnson, and Merck. As The Intercept reported, Booker's argument for voting against the measure was the same as that of the primary pharmaceutical trade organization, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, or when you shorten it up, PhRMA. Yeah, again, this is we call them Big Pharma as a pejorative, obviously, and they're like, oh yeah, that's interesting. We're just gonna call our trade group PhRMA. That's fun. Now, of course, both Booker and pharmaceutical representatives from those trade groups say that, drugs from Canada, well, we can't import them because they're not safe enough. Now, nobody was buying that excuse, as we point out. You think that Canada has more lax standards? Canada's to the left of us. Now, you could argue, some Canadians would probably argue with, hey, we're not that far left. I mean, we had Rob Ford in Toronto. Okay, hey, fair enough. But nonetheless, from an American perspective, you guys are lefties. Just saying. And that just shows you, of course, how far right America has actually gotten. So, but regardless, it's funny to think that since Canada is so far to the left, they believe in big government, big regulation, socialized medicine, all that stuff, that their pharmaceutical drugs would have less sufficient safety standards than American drugs. That is comical. Nobody believed it. Nobody bought it. Okay. And as Sirota notes, some drugs sold in the United States are in fact fully manufactured overseas. So they were they're completely made overseas, and then they're imported anyway. But they're imported through the company. The company can import it. It's their drugs, right? Their factory makes it over in, I don't know, Belgium, China, Ireland, you name it, right? The UK, Canada. And they import it here for themselves, and then they jack up the price and sell it for even more money to Americans. So that's a weird excuse, right? And not only that, but some drugs that are made in the United States, because people might be wondering about those. Well, those are made in the United States, but actually have some foreign ingredients that they bring in from other countries. So not even that. And this is according to numbers from the Food and Drug Administration. Now, the thing about that completely destroyed Cory Booker's argument is that when you manufacture drugs overseas and you bring them in, well, the FDA already has a robust mechanism for inspecting drugs that come into us from other countries. So they already inspect this. They already, know what's going on here. So to say that they're completely unsafe or they don't fit our standards is absolutely ridiculous. But of course, you already know all this, or at least you're already aware. The real reason that he fought against this amendment and the bill was because of how much money he got from the pharmaceutical industry. In the 2014 election, when Booker ran for Senate, he had actually the highest total, over $220,000, in campaign donations from the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry of any member of Congress. So, man, he's rolling in that big pharma money. He loves it. And look, as I said, New Jersey has a lot of these drug manufacturers in it. And they, of course, have a huge influence in local elections. So, they threw $100,000 or a couple $100,000 towards Cory Booker, and he's like, oh, yeah, pharmaceutical companies. Ooh, yeah. You know what? The drugs that they make here are fantastic. But don't you dare go and import those unsafe drugs from other countries, even though they're actually manufactured in other countries and just imported here through the drug companies. So, but no, he's like, I'm just looking out for my constituent. I'm just looking out for the people. No, you're not. Now, after, of course, intense pressure from progressives and the huge backlash, Booker's like, oh, you know what? Oh, that whole thing about not importing drugs. You know what? I'm actually in favor. I'm super progressive. Vote for me. And he teamed up with Bernie Sanders and other Democrats to sponsor the Affordable and Safe Prescription Drug Importation Act in February, which he said, had alleviate his concerns about safety. Okay, fair enough. Now, that, of course, did not eliminate all Democratic Party opposition to the initiative. During May deliberations over an FDA authorization bill, Sanders and Democratic Senator Bob Casey and Elizabeth Warren had proposed an amendment allowing for the importation of drugs from FDA-approved facilities in Canada. So that's what I was talking about. Where it's like, oh, we put some extra assurances in here, so now they have to be FDA approved, and we can still get them from Canada, and that'll still cut the cost of prescription medicine by quite a bit. It'll save Americans a lot of money. But this also goes to, you have these safety concerns. Well, we just hopefully have allayed those concerns. Did it go through? The amendment was, of course, laden with protections, according to Casey, but Democrats Patty Murray and Michael Bennet, two big beneficiaries of pharma campaign cash, voted against it in committee, and it failed 13-10. Look, I know some Democrats or some people will say, hey, money, that's got no impacts on votes whatsoever. I mean, I've never seen anybody be impacted, any votes be impacted by somebody giving them campaign contributions. I mean, that just doesn't happen. I mean, it's just speech, right? These companies, all they're doing is they're just talking, right? They don't actually impact the votes at all. This is an example of money impacting votes. Do you think those representatives would have looked at that bill that actually had a lot of protections in there to make sure that these drugs were actually safe to import? You think they looked at that and said, it's still not enough. Sorry, we need to go back to the drawing board. No, what they did is that they looked at that and they said, yeah, that's fine, but Also, I got to look at the money that I'm getting from the pharmaceutical industry, and I think that's far more important to me because that's going to allow me to get re-election. All that's going to do is to save the American taxpayer money. I don't really care about that. No, I care about getting my legalized bribes. Okay. The pharmaceutical company basically told them, if you vote for this, you're not going to get campaign contributions and you're going to lose your elections. Sorry. Look, do you think that these people voted in favor of the pharmaceutical industry because they believed that the drugs were unsafe and that they were just accepting that money out of the goodness of their hearts, or the pharmaceutical company was giving that money out of the goodness of their hearts? No. They wanted something in return. They always want something in return. And that is votes that happen to favor them. This is corruption. And it's a good example of the floodgates essentially being open to more of that corruption. Now, it's actually gotten worse, too. And some of the highest levels that we've seen in decades. According to a Kaiser News Health analysis, campaign spending by the pharmaceutical industry has only skyrocketed within the last few years. Congressional donations from pharmaceutical PACs are up 11% as compared to a similar time frame in 2015 alone. And donations to ranking members of health-related committees have risen from by 80% from 2 years ago. So just within the last couple of years, it has ramped up. Lobbying from those same industry groups like pharma are also on the rise. Look, there was no real reason to keep us from buying imported prescription drugs. It's not about safety. It's all about profit, and it's all about greed, and it always has been. And now we have proof that this would save lots of money and would also, of course, not be any more dangerous than the drugs we already have imported, since they import it the same way. So, okay. Anyway. There's that. So let's go to the problem with prescription drugs. Okay. Now, a new report out is showing just how disastrous the opioid epidemic actually is. According to the Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and the Opioid Crisis, the United States is now losing 142 Americans every day from addiction or from drug overdose. Now, that is the equivalent, of course, and this is disastrous, of the 9/11 death toll every 3 weeks. Jesus. Now, the report was, of course, released in accordance with an executive order signed in March by President Trump to study ways to combat and treat the scourge of drug abuse, addiction, and the opioid crisis. Now, in its interim report, the Commission's first and foremost urgently recommended the President declare a national emergency under either the Public Health Service Act or the Stafford Act. Now, why would they do that? Well, they argue that since 1999, the number of opioid overdoses in America have quadrupled. According to the CDC, not coincidentally, in that same period, the amount of prescription opioids in America have quadrupled as well. So what they're talking about here is, look, man, we've got a prescription drug problem. I mean, we're looking at overdoses of prescription drugs that have quadrupled. And, oh, look at that. The amount of drugs that are being prescribed also quadrupled. There's something there. There seems to be a little bit of a correlation here. So maybe we need to actually do something about it. So I'm not sure exactly what kind of powers that would grant the president or the White House or the executive branch under the national emergency or under the Public Health Service Act or the Stafford Act. But I'm not sure that that's the solution. Now, they continue. This is an epidemic that all Americans face because here's a grim reality. Americans consume more opioids than any other country in the world. Now, that's interesting, right? Now, I want to bring up how it's kind of amazing that we have this war on drugs, right? We've got this war on drugs, and yet we seem to be losing. We don't seem to be winning this. We're not winning here. In fact, there is actually no winning going on when it comes to the war on drugs. Now, you know why? It's because we specifically focused on things like marijuana instead of prescription opioids, which are actually much, much more powerful than marijuana. The real killers of Americans are perfectly legal and are prescribed willy-nilly. Isn't that a little strange? Now, look, one of the criticisms of the Trump administration, and there are many, is that despite his promises, he's actually done nothing towards actually going to fight the opioid epidemic. In fact, I go back to that CNN report where there was this Donald Trump guy that would go to all the rallies, would play his guitar, and CNN talked to him, and he lost his son. He lost his son to opioids, to drug addiction. And he's like, the reason that I follow Donald Trump is, it's not because I hate black people. It's not because I'm economically insecure. It's because he says he's actually going to do something about it. And I believe him. I believed him more than I believed Hillary Clinton, who I didn't think was going to do anything. I thought he came in and he told me, I'm going to do something. I'm going to help people like your son, get away from the opioid addiction. Well, what has he done? He hasn't really done anything. In fact, he rarely talks about it, unless it is, of course, to say, drugs are pouring over the border, that's why we need a wall. Well, it's not going to stop the people who are already addicted. In fact, it's not going to stop drugs at all. And look, you might think that I'm complaining, of course, without any solutions, but I actually do have some solutions. But one of the other things that Donald Trump says he's going to do said he was going to do or to help the opioid addiction that isn't actually going to work, is that he's got Jeff Sessions in the Department of Justice basically doubling down on the failed war on drugs. Do you think that's going to stop the opioid addiction? No, it's not. Because the war on drugs, again, they're going after illegal drugs. They're not actually going after the prescriptions that are getting people addicted and hooked. And then when, of course, their prescription runs out, they're already addicted, and they end up having to go to heroin or something stronger. That's not going to stop them. That's not going to prevent addiction. Okay? Going after or doubling down on the drug war and putting up your stupid wall, it's not going to do a goddamn thing. Let's just take this thing that we've done for decades and keep trying it. I'm sure it'll eventually work out. Now, the report noted, and this is very important, it said that one of the biggest obstacles to opioid crisis involves access to healthcare services designed to treat and combat addiction. Now, that is something that Donald Trump in his budgets had cut out. They actually made cuts to these programs and also promised enormous cuts to Medicaid. They said over 40% of people with a substance use disorder also have a mental health problem, but less than half of those people receive treatment for either issue. The reasons for these treatment gaps are many, including lack of access to care, fear and shame of discrimination, and lack of motivation to seek treatment. Also, I would assume possible arrest, because, again, drug war, right? Now, you know what would solve all that stuff, or at least some of that? Well, number one, you end the war on drugs, and you institute universal health care. Remember, a lot of these people, they can't get health care, they can't afford it. Well, I can't afford to go and get help with my addiction. I want to get help, I can't afford it. Well, what do? I don't know. I'm out of options. And if I tell somebody, I might get arrested. Like if I'm actually doing illegal drugs, if it gets to that point. So these are significant problems. And what is Trump doing about it? Nothing. In fact, the replacement plan that he recently had pushed, and that he still wants to push, right? Even though Senate Republicans have no interest. They're like, we're done with this. We're going to go to tax reform. Jesus Christ. We said we were going to repeal Obamacare. We're not even interested in doing that anymore. Fuck it. Now, President Trump says, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're not done with that because I still want you to do it. Well, that plan would have cut Medicaid funding by $772 billion over the next 10 years. As Rolling Stone noted, Medicaid currently treats 30% of the nation's addicts. So you're going to cut a program that actually helps people who are addicted. President doesn't really care. Look, he didn't care about that. He uses people in order to get what he wants. That's the essence of Donald Trump. So, it's the same guy. The guy that he promised, I'm going to do something. I'm going to help people, right? I'm going to help people like your son. He was lying to him. He had no problem lying to the guy's face. He's got no problem lying to the country's face when it comes to this issue. He's not interested in doing anything to help people that are addicted to drugs. And that's a shame. Because, look, we're losing a lot of people. This is something that impacts communities all over the country, and especially in places that voted for Donald Trump in the first place. And it's something that we need to address. And we can't address it with doing more of what we did before, which is, of course, more criminalization, more arrests, more police, and as well as cutting health-related services. So President Trump is definitely dropping the ball on this issue. But again, we sort of expected that because he doesn't really care about those people that he had promised to help. And again, it is a national tragedy that we actually have to have some real solutions to solve. Okay. Let's move on here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take a 1 minute break, so I'll be right back. So stay right here, around the nation. Hey everybody, back around the nation here. Taking a little break to get myself organized. I want to read a tweet, actually. Raven Dawn had tweets out. No contributor on. Sad. I think we all agree with you there. All right, another tweet here. And you can tweet me at TYT or at Jeff's Politics, and you can use the hashtag TYT if we can get that trending, that'd be super sweet. Okay. One more tweet here. And that is from Screaming for Change. She says, New Vegas vetting subject. How long will the new hire at the White House last? That's a good question. Give it a month. Actually, you know what? I want to see who it is first before I start making bets. Right now, they don't have a new communications director. Scaramucci just got forced out. But once they bring in the new one, once I look at it, you can generally see what direction it's going to go and how long they'll be there. So from that, or at least you can make some good guesses. If you guys have any guesses, you can also tweet. And let me see if we can find some comments. Also, don't forget there's a super chat. So if you use the super chat here on YouTube and put a comment out, I will read that comment after I get back from breaks. Okay. Ian Campbell in the chat actually has a great question. He said, why isn't the opioid epidemic being addressed in the same way the crack cocaine epidemic was addressed? Why is it not being criminalized? I think we all know the answer to that, Ian. It's because the opioid epidemic, it affects mostly white people. let's be honest, there is a huge racial problem when it comes to policing, when it comes to justice, and of course, when it comes to the drug war. Suddenly, white governors in these states like Kentucky and Ohio and places that have been devastated by this, these white communities, these governors look at it and say, "Oh my God, these people are my neighbors. These people are my friends. They're not terrible people. They're not like the they're not like the black people." And let's be honest, there is that. When it came to the crack epidemic that was going on, you'd hear white conservatives saying, "Oh, it's a family problem. It's the broken families and single moms and parents in those black communities. That's the real problem. That's why all these people have drugs." But when it comes to the white families, it is an epidemic, and we've got to do something about it. So that's a great question, Ian. A lot of this does come down to, unfortunately, racism, which is definitely a part of it. And of course, there's overprescription of drugs, of course. Then, you've got lack of healthcare benefits as well. I think is part of that. It's a complicated issue, but racism certainly plays into a factor of how people who are affected by the opioid epidemic are treated versus people in the crack epidemic. But anyway, there's that. Let's go into another story. And by the way, thank you for the comments, and thank you all for the tweets. And keep them coming. Whoops. There we go. Now, recently, President Trump has been all sorts of giddy on the news that Foxconn will be opening up a new manufacturing plant in Wisconsin. Oh, look, jobs. It's going to be great for jobs. It's going to be great for Wisconsin and the taxpayers. Okay, well, look, jobs, great. I like jobs, but I'm going to look into the details. And of course, the details, as I'm going to show you, actually are not great when it comes to what they have to give up to, or what they are planning on giving up in order to get this Foxconn company built and to bring those jobs in. Now, according to the International Business Times, another great piece by Sirota, Republican Governor Scott Walker is proposing to give the company a $3 billion taxpayer subsidy for building the plant. Now, look, that's not unheard of. I mean, Walmart does this all the time. They go in, they get a local town to go and give a giant tax break and some subsidies, and they build a Walmart there. And eventually, when that subsidy or tax break runs out, they leave. And then they destroy the town in the process. Now, but again, this is different because it's not just a tax break. It is an actual subsidy. They're giving Foxconn $3 billion to go and build in Wisconsin. So there goes taxpayer money into subsidizing a non-American company, right? A Chinese company that is famously known for its very, very poor working conditions and actually poor environmental record. Now, working conditions, I don't know if you guys remember the stories about the suicide nets being installed outside of Foxconn company windows. I'm just saying, if you have to install suicide nets, there seems to be a problem with your working conditions. But as far as the environmental stuff, well, Foxconn is also known for poisoning Chinese rivers. Wonderful. Now, which makes the fact that the Walker administration also slipped language into a bill that would exempt the company from state environmental laws that much more disastrous. Let me explain. Or let's let David Sirota explain. Under those laws, companies are prohibited from discharging materials or otherwise polluting wetlands without a specific permit to do so. Under the bill that Walker has put forward, companies within the new Economics and Information Technology Manufacturing Zone will be allowed to discharge material into non-federal wetlands if it relates to the construction or operation of a manufacturing facility. Very interesting. Hey man, if it's a non-federal wetland, because obviously federal land versus state land. Like, it's Wisconsin's land, so I'm just going to let you go ahead and pollute it. If you're in this economics and information technology manufacturing zone, we'll just let you pollute the local areas, the local wetlands. Wonderful. Now, another section of the bill outlines how existing Wisconsin law requires companies to obtain a permit to disturb or transform nearby waterways. So basically, hey man, if you're gonna do something that's gonna change the waterway, we'd like to know about it. Now, according to the official analysis of the bill by analysts in the Republican-controlled legislature, the new legislation will allow Walker's administration to waive those permitting requirements. Quote, if they relate to the construction, access, or operation of a new manufacturing facility in the zone where Foxconn is planning to build its new facility. Interesting. Now, a separate section of the bill also exempts new energy utilities built inside the Foxconn development zone from facing regulatory oversight by the state's Public Service Commission. Those provisions also exempt regulation of the building and relocation of high-voltage transmission lines, according to state legislative analysis. So this is chock full of deregulation and saying, hey, you know what? These laws that are on the books, we're just going to let you waive them. That's interesting. So now they're giving this Chinese company billions of dollars and saying, come over here and trash our waterways. It's fine. And any company related to you, whether it be a power, a utility company that's in that same zone, well, they're also free from these requirements and regulations. Wonderful. Now, some of you might be saying, well, hey, what's the problem? We've got too many rules and regulations anyway. Look, man, they're bringing in these jobs. And if we had those regulations, they wouldn't bring in those jobs. In fact, you know what? Too much regulation. We're overregulated. It is strangling businesses. It's killing jobs. Why do you hate jobs? Look, that's what every Republican is going to probably be saying. Hey, man, we don't need these rules. The free market will decide. Stop punishing businesses with overregulation. Well, let me show you what happens when you do that, when you get rid of those regulations. In 2013, Foxconn drew scrutiny into China for dumping polluted water from its manufacturing facility into a nearby river. According to Chinese environmental activists, they described the water as having a black-green color and a strong chemical smell. So, yeah, just go ahead and dump your manufacturing waste into the river, and the river's going to be fine. Who cares if it's black-green and smells like chemicals? Chemicals are fine. Quit being anti-science, libbies. Foxconn defended itself by saying it was complying with all local laws within the industrial park where it's operated, which I'm sure that same industrial park just happened to have a lot of waivers for pollution in order to encourage business. Hey man, we're just following the rules. Look, we followed all the rules. Look, Republicans, they say the same thing, right? Now, in reality though, when Republicans get into power, like they have in Wisconsin, they deregulate the industry. Now, let me give you an example. They deregulate industry like fracking. Now, when that happens and when your water becomes contaminated to the point where it catches on fire, they'll just say, hey man, we were just following the rules. I mean, we got into power, we changed the rules, so it could be super friendly to corporations and our corporate friends that give us large bribes in the form of campaign contributions. And gee, whenever something bad happens, you can just defend yourself by saying, well, we were following the rules and regulations. And look, man, let me give you another example. When the Democrats and Republicans teamed up to deregulate the banks, and the economy crashed, and then they come together and they say, hey man, don't blame us. All we were doing is following our rules. And in fact, we need less rules in the banks. This is what they do. Look, when people in Wisconsin start getting sick from this company basically ignoring those rules or, because they're waived, they don't actually have to follow them by law, they're going to say, hey man, we let this foreign company in. Sure, they poisoned your water, but look at the jobs we created. Look at the wonderful jobs. Look, there's a reason that progressives want rules, okay? It's not to punish companies. It's not to make sure, that these companies fail or whatever. No, no, no. It's to make sure that our kids and our friends and our neighbors don't end up drinking water that will kill them. That's all. We can go into the issue of unneeded or excessive regulation. I'm sure we could have a good conversation about that. But that doesn't mean you get rid of every regulation. Doesn't mean you do what Donald Trump wants to do and, for every new regulation, we've got to repeal 2 old ones. Really? Well, when it comes to environmental regulations, let's see, we want to have a regulation that stops, power plants from putting out solid waste or liquid waste into the rivers. Well, that means if we want to do that, then we've got to get rid of the ones that protect wetlands or ones that protect something else. That seems ridiculous. You should go through and find the ones that work, and I'm not at all, I don't at all have a problem with going through some of the ones that are ineffective, don't work, or, things like that. But, or ones that are specifically crafted to punish industry. There are some that do that as well. But for the most part, regulation is actually there to help people. And look, let me give you an example. Or actually, you know what? Let me ask you a question instead. You guys understand? Do you know what happened before we had regulations? Well, look, forget tap water, right? You could literally light your rivers on fire, and they would burn for days from all the levels of pollution. You also had giant smog clouds in LA. You had acid rain. You had the giant hole in the ozone layer. Regulations, rules, put a stop to those. They actually fix those things. You look at LA now. It's not smoggy. You go to places where there was acid rain. There's no more acid rain there. Okay? That hole in the ozone, fixed. It's back. And look, that's the whole point. And now you can't go and light a river on fire. Now you can still light your tap water on fire because of fracking. Again, super problematic, right? But the whole point is regulations existed to fix those problems. And the problems are fixed. That doesn't mean we need to take the regulation away, because when you do that, the companies can just go back to doing what they were doing before and poison the air, water, and land again. We don't want that. And those same businesses, look, when those regulations were put into place, they screamed bloody murder about it. And that's what they do. That's what they always do. Like, no. Look, our sole purpose, and I'm not saying that this is bad, but is to maximize profit. Okay, that's your whole focus. That's fine. That's what we create a business for, maximize profit. Great. Okay. But that means we have to put in rules in order to make sure that you don't make that profit at the expense of labor, at the expense of the environment. So, and at the expense, of course, the taxpayer as well. Now, if you can't make sure that at the very least you're not poisoning your customers and the environment, if that is too much of a burden for you, then maybe you shouldn't be in business at all. Okay. Moving on. Now, if it's one thing that I know, it's that Republicans hate censorship. Boy, they can't stand the SJW shutting down free speech on college campuses. And actually, look, that's something I actually also agree with. I don't think we should be shutting down anybody's speeches on college campuses. However, unlike at least half of all Republicans polled during a recent poll, I believe in all of the First Amendment, that everybody has a right to free speech. And also, everybody also has a right to the freedom of the press. Now, half of these Republicans apparently do not. in a recent poll from YouGov, found that 45% of Republicans favor permitting the courts to shut down news media outlets for publishing stories that they say are biased or inaccurate. Now, I'm going to break that down in a minute here, but just 20% opposed the idea, and 35% said, well, I don't know. I mean, should they be able to shut down media? Should the courts be able to go and shut down a media enterprise that they think that someone believes is biased or inaccurate? So this is like the other side of the fake news thing. Now, look, I didn't like it when CNN or other media outlets were like, we need to go after fake news. We think that caused the loss of Hillary Clinton, all that fake news, and Russia, and Comey, and Bernie Bros, and all that other stuff that they blame the election loss on. And by the way, you notice how they're not talking about that part of fake news anymore, investigating and shutting it down. Well, now this is the right's reaction to that. And the right says, oh, yeah, by the way, we think that it'd be great to go and shut down media outlets that we disagree with. Not good. Now, look, one of the problems, and one of the biggest problems, I think, in this, other than the constitutional part of it, is who decides what is biased or inaccurate. Does the state decide it? Donald Trump, the Republican Party, the establishment? Who decides that and then brings that to the court? Or who does the court designate to decide that, or do they decide that themselves? It's very strange, right? Now, look, you start putting the power to decide what is biased or what is inaccurate, you put that in the power of the courts, which are right now solidly conservative for at least the next generation. That's going to be problematic, and not just for the conservative side, but for the liberal, or not just for the liberal side, but the conservative side too. What happens when it flips? And then suddenly, if they're still around in like 100 years, a liberal court says, hey, you know what? Fox News, biased, inaccurate, get rid of it. Not good. Or whatever conservative news station is at that point, if we're even around. But anyway, look, again, this entire idea is also widely unconstitutional. Now, most of these people, to give them credit, they have no idea. Some of them do know and don't care. Now, how many don't actually know? Well, it's actually a large percentage of them, unsurprisingly, because they listen to conservative media. They're not getting their facts. 35% of Republicans surveyed say shutting down news outlets or biased inaccurate reporting would not violate the First Amendment. They would be wrong. But that's ignorance. You could fix that with facts. Okay. Now, what you can't fix is that 10% of Republicans that think, I actually don't care about the Constitution. I don't like CNN. I don't like MSNBC, or I don't like TYT, or I don't like, I don't like that Jeff guy's show. I want to shut them down because I think they're biased and inaccurate. Well, look, there's a difference here, right? So I think Fox News is biased and inaccurate, and I think I've got a lot of proof behind me, but I'm not railing to shut them down. I'm not like, the government, big government, through the courts should come and shut down Fox News. Those are words that you will never hear me honestly say, okay? It's not something that I advocate for. I don't like Breitbart. You think I want to shut down Breitbart? One American News? You think I want to shut down Sean Hannity's show? No. I actually enjoy him making an ass of himself day in, day out. That's fine. So, big difference here. And look, again, while I don't rail against shutting them down, I do rail against their inaccuracies and their biases. And look, everybody has a bias, of course. We have a bias here. I'm a progressive. I come at this from a progressive point of view. That's the whole point of the show, is to look at the news through a lens of progressive, from a progressive living in, the middle part of the country. So, I mean, under that description, well, I'd be shut down because I'm biased, right, by the courts. But it wouldn't just be me, it would be people on the conservative side as well, because they also have a bias. And that, again, I'm explaining how that's perfectly fine to have a bias and to do your own opinion and to have your own opinion. But they would get shut down too. It would be totally against the First Amendment. Now look, how much of a snowflake are you if you're triggered by something that you don't agree with? Again, I'm not triggered by it. I actually find different viewpoints absolutely fascinating and very, very interesting to go and learn about and to study how people are. Now, some people see other people's facts and or other people's opinions, and they go, nope, not interested at all. In fact, I want to shut you down. These 10% of people polled want to shut people down because of different opinions, shutting down their free speech. Now, and look, in using bias as an example, have you guys seen Hannity? Again, he'd get shut down in a day. If that's not bias, I don't know what is. And again, he's allowed to pick a side. He's allowed to have an opinion. But look, my whole point is putting the courts in charge of shutting down media outlets for bias and inaccuracy, which unfortunately our media does do or does have, is not necessarily a solution. Look, a lot of the opinions of the hosts, I think, are actually based on the parent corporation's interests. Some outlets like Fox and MSNBC, we know that's the case. They've got directives that are handed down. Now, Fox was much more notorious because they would, Roger Ailes, especially when he was in charge, would hand out talking points to everybody, and he would micromanage everybody on the channel. Okay, you got your talking points for the day. Now you need to go and recite them. MSNBC, it was more like, hey man, we're not outsiders, we're part of the establishment, so just don't criticize the establishment too much, okay? Both sort of the same problem here. Now, if you want to stop that, you don't get the courts involved and do something that is wildly unconstitutional. No, what you do is that you break up the large corporations that own these news channels. You end that for-profit model, okay? You end this media consolidation. What you're going to do is you're going to break the media up and you're going to stop basing it on advertisers and money. Once you do that, you're actually going to start to get more unfiltered actual opinion as well as unfiltered straight news. Because it's no longer going to be about how many advertisers, how much access I can get to the politicians so I can throw softballs at them and all that stuff. No, it'll actually be based on, we're here to really report what's going on. And there's a definite role for that. I do opinion here, but I could definitely see why we need more just regular straight news. And we don't have that anymore. And it's because I think a lot, in big part, due to media consolidation, these big corporations, and money. Okay. Anyway, I think I'll save this story for tomorrow. So we're gonna save Sinclair Media for tomorrow. So make sure to tune in then. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern, right here, TYT Nation. I am going to end out the show. Thanks for going around the nation today. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for the tweets. Thanks for watching, of course. You can always tweet me during the show. And you can also use the YouTube Super Chat. I definitely strongly recommend that. If you want to see your comments read on air. And, of course, I go in and check the chat during the show as well. So, all right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Love you guys. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, TYT Nation. We'll see you tomorrow.